Jae-ho Kim rubbed her tired eyes as she stared at the large screen in front of her. The clock on the wall showed 3 a.m., but she couldn't leave her post at the Korean Space Command Center. Something was wrong with the numbers she was seeing, and she needed to figure out what it was. As Chief Space Traffic Controller, Jae-ho was responsible for tracking objects in Earth's orbit. Usually, this meant watching satellites and making sure they didn't crash into each other. But tonight, her computer was showing strange patterns she had never seen before. "Computer, show me the movement of debris cluster B7 again," she said, reaching for her third cup of coffee. The screen lit up with hundreds of small dots, each representing a piece of space junk. Jae-ho watched as the dots moved across the screen, spreading out like ripples in a pond. "This can't be right," she muttered, checking the data again. According to her calculations, the amount of space debris had increased by 15% in just the last month. This was not normal. Jae-ho picked up her phone and called her boss, Director Ta-won Park. After 4 rings, a grumpy voice answered. "Do you know what time it is, Kim?" Ta-won asked. "Sir, I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a problem," Jae-ho said. "The debris field in Sector 7 is growing faster than our models predicted. If this continues, it could threaten our new communications satellites." There was a long pause on the other end. "Send me the report in the morning," Ta-won finally said. "And Kim, this better be worth my time." The line went dead. Jae-ho sighed and looked back at her screen. She knew Ta-won cared more about launching new satellites than watching old space junk. The Space Command Center made money from putting things into orbit, not cleaning them up. As the sun rose over Seoul, Jae-ho finished writing her report. The numbers were clear. Pieces of old satellites, rocket parts, and other space junk were starting to hit each other more often. Each collision created more pieces of debris, which could cause more collisions. It was like a chain reaction waiting to happen. She walked to Ta-won's office later that morning, carrying her tablet with all the data. The director sat behind his large desk, looking impatient. "Make it quick, Kim. I have a meeting with satellite companies in an hour," he said. Jae-ho connected her tablet to the wall screen. "Sir, look at these patterns," she said, showing the movement of debris. "We're seeing more collisions in this area. Each impact creates hundreds of new pieces of junk. If we don't do something soon, it could become dangerous for all spacecraft." Ta-won leaned back in his chair. "Space is big, Kim. A few pieces of junk aren't going to cause problems for our operations." "But sir, these aren't just a few pieces," Jae-ho argued. "We're tracking over 40,000 objects now, and those are just the ones big enough to see. There could be millions of smaller pieces up there." "Enough," Ta-won held up his hand. "We have contracts to fulfill. 10 new satellites need to go up next month. Unless you can show me actual damage to our equipment, this is not a priority." Jae-ho left the office feeling frustrated. She knew she was right, but nobody seemed to care. Back at her desk, she started writing emails to other space agencies. Maybe someone else would listen. As she typed, an alert popped up on her screen. Another piece of debris had just broken apart, creating a new cloud of fragments. Jae-ho watched the dots spread across her display, knowing that each one was like a bullet orbiting the Earth at thousands of miles per hour. "Someone has to do something," she said to herself, "before it's too late." Little did Jae-ho know, but her warning would soon prove more accurate than anyone could have imagined. The chain reaction she feared was already beginning, high above the Earth, where no one could see it coming. Han-Sol Lee stood in the satellite control room, his eyes fixed on the main screen. As the youngest engineer on the maintenance team, he had the night shift watching over the Pacific Communications Array. The array was a group of satellites that provided internet and phone service to most of Asia and the Pacific Islands. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of computers. Han-Sol checked the satellite readings for the 100th time that night. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. Maybe it was because he had read Jae-ho Kim's report about space debris earlier that day. A warning light started flashing on his console. Han-Sol sat up straight, his heart beating faster. One of the main satellites, PCA-7, was reporting unusual movement. "This is weird," he said, typing commands into his computer. The satellite's cameras turned on, showing a view of Earth far below. Everything looked fine, but the movement sensors were still showing problems. Then he saw it. A small dot appeared on the camera feed, moving fast toward PCA-7. Han-Sol's hands flew across the keyboard as he tried to move the satellite out of the way. Come on," he whispered. But it was too late. The impact lasted less than a second. On the camera, Han-Sol saw a flash of light. Then the image went dark. Warning alerts filled his screen as PCA-7 started spinning out of control. Han-Sol grabbed his phone and called the emergency number. "This is Engineer Lee at Pacific Array Control. We have a critical situation. PCA-7 has been hit by debris. I repeat, PCA-7 is damaged and unstable." Within minutes, the control room filled with senior engineers and managers. They watched in horror as their screens showed PCA-7 breaking apart. Each piece of the broken satellite became new debris, spreading out like a cloud in space. "How many people are affected?" someone asked. "PCA-7 covers most of the Western Pacific," Han-Sol answered. "Millions of people just lost their internet and phone service." In the chaos, Han-Sol noticed something even worse. The debris from PCA-7 was moving toward other satellites in the array. He quickly calculated the paths using his computer. "We need to move the other satellites now," he shouted. "The debris field is spreading." The team worked fast, sending commands to the remaining satellites. Most of them moved to safety, but 2 more were hit by smaller pieces of debris. Though they weren't destroyed, their solar panels were damaged. As the sun rose over the Pacific, reports started coming in from different countries. Islands had lost contact with the mainland. Ships couldn't send emergency signals. Airplanes had to change their routes because navigation systems weren't working properly. Han-Sol stayed at his post, tracking the debris field as it spread. He thought about Jae-ho's warning, which nobody had taken seriously. Now they had proof she was right. But at what cost? His phone buzzed. It was a message from Jae-ho herself. "I saw what happened. We need to talk. Meet me at the Space Command Center as soon as you can." Han-Sol looked at his screens one last time before leaving. The dots representing debris from PCA-7 were still spreading out, joining the thousands of other pieces of space junk orbiting Earth. He knew this wasn't the end of the problem. It was just the beginning. As he drove to meet Jae-ho, news reports on the radio talked about the mysterious internet outage affecting the Pacific region. Nobody mentioned space debris or broken satellites, but soon, Han-Sol thought, everyone would know about the danger floating above their heads. The question was, would they learn about it too late? Do-yeon Choi walked quickly through the halls of the Korean Space Research Institute, carrying a stack of papers. She had been studying space debris for 10 years, but she had never seen anything like the data from the past week. After the PCA-7 satellite accident, everything was getting worse faster than anyone had predicted. She pushed open the door to the emergency meeting room, where Jae-ho Kim and Han-Sol Lee were waiting. Large screens on the walls showed maps of Earth's orbit, now filled with red warning signs. "It's happening," Do-yeon said, spreading her papers on the table. "The Kessler syndrome has started. Can you explain that in simple terms?" Han-Sol asked, looking at the complex diagrams. Do-yeon picked up a marker and went to the whiteboard. "Think of it like this," she said, drawing circles. "When one satellite breaks, it makes many pieces of debris. These pieces hit other satellites, which make more debris. Each collision causes more collisions. It's like a chain reaction that keeps getting bigger." Jae-ho pointed to one of the screens. "Look at this. 3 more satellites were hit this morning. The debris field is growing twice as fast as yesterday." Do-yeon nodded. My calculations show that if we don't do something soon, we could lose access to space completely. Within 3 months, there might be so much debris that no spacecraft could safely orbit Earth. The room went quiet. They all understood what this meant. No more weather forecasts from satellites. No GPS for cars and phones. No satellite internet or TV. Space would become too dangerous to use. But surely the big space agencies have plans for this? Han Sol asked. NASA, ESA, someone must know what to do. They have plans, Du Yen said, but nothing that can work fast enough. Their cleanup systems would take years to remove enough debris. We don't have years anymore. We have weeks, maybe months. Jai-ho's phone buzzed. She read the message and her face got pale. 2 more satellites just went dark. Military communications this time. Do-yeon turned back to her papers and typed something into her computer. After a few minutes, she looked up with wide eyes. The cascade is speeding up, she said. Each piece of debris from those military satellites will cause more damage because they were in higher orbits. They move faster up there. Han Sol walked to the window and looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, but nobody could see the disaster happening above them. How do we stop it? He asked. Do-yeon opened her laptop and showed them a design she had been working on. I have an idea for a new kind of cleanup system. It uses magnetic fields to catch debris without touching it. But it's never been tested. Nobody thought we would need it so soon. How long would it take to build? Jai-ho asked. With emergency funding and everyone working together, maybe 2 weeks for a prototype. But we would need help from other countries, and someone would have to fly up there to use it. Just then, Director Ta Won burst into the room. His usual confident look was gone. The president just called, he said. The International Space Station had to make an emergency move to avoid debris. They're demanding answers. Jai-ho stood up. Show them Du-yeon's research. All of it. They need to understand what's happening. Du-yeon gathered her papers. I'll prepare a presentation for the International Space Agencies. But we have to move fast. Every hour we wait, more debris is created. As they left the room, Han Sol looked at the screens one last time. The red warning areas were spreading like spilled ink across the maps. Somewhere up there, pieces of metal were flying around Earth at thousands of miles per hour, turning space into a dangerous maze. The time for warnings was over. Now they needed action. The large meeting room at the International Space Center in Seoul was filled with people from different space agencies. At the front of the room stood Min Ki-kang, one of Korea's most experienced astronauts. He had been in space 12 times, but nothing had prepared him for this mission. We have 6 weeks, Min Ki said, pointing to the timeline on the screen. After that, the debris field will be too thick for any spacecraft to pass through safely. Do-yeon stood up and showed her design for the debris collector. The machine creates a magnetic field that can gather small pieces of metal without touching them, she explained. But someone needs to control it manually. The debris field is too complex for automatic systems. Han Sol raised his hand. I've been working on something that might help, he said. He connected his laptop to the screen and showed a new computer program. This AI system can predict where debris will move. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we have now. The room was quiet as everyone looked at the 3-dimensional map Han Sol's program created. It showed thousands of pieces of debris moving in different patterns. How accurate is this? Min Ki asked. It's right about 80% of the time, Han Sol answered. The program learns from each new piece of data we give it. Jai-ho, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We need both systems. Du-yeon's collector to catch the debris, and Han Sol's AI to tell us where to look. But we also need a crew. Min Ki nodded. I'll pilot the mission. But I need a team who understands these systems. People who can think fast when things go wrong. I'll go, Jai-ho said. Everyone looked at her in surprise. I've tracked these objects for years. I know their patterns better than anyone. "You're not trained for space," Director Taiwan protested. "Then train me," Jai-ho replied firmly. "We don't have time to teach someone else everything I know about debris patterns." Min-ki thought for a moment, then agreed. "We can give her crash course training, but we need to start now." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Jai-ho's life. While Du-yeon and her team built the collection device, Jai-ho trained in the space simulation chamber. She learned how to move in zero gravity, how to handle emergencies, and how to use the spacesuit. Min-ki worked with her every day, teaching her everything he knew about surviving in space. Meanwhile, Han-sol kept improving his AI program. He worked with teams from NASA and ESA, adding more data to make the predictions better. But every day, more satellites were damaged. The debris field kept growing. "The collector is ready," Du-yeon announced one morning. They all gathered around the device in the testing lab. It looked like a large satellite dish with special coils around the edges. "We've tested it with small pieces of metal. It works, but we don't know how it will handle the real debris field." "We'll find out soon enough," Min-ki said. He looked at Jai-ho. "Are you ready?" Jai-ho nodded, though her heart was beating fast. In 1 week, they would launch into space. If they failed, Earth would lose its connection to space for generations. If they succeeded, they might save not just the satellites, but humanity's future in space. That night, as Jai-ho looked up at the stars, she couldn't see the dangerous cloud of debris surrounding Earth. But she knew it was there, waiting. Soon, she would be up there too, facing the problem that nobody had taken seriously until it was almost too late. The morning of the launch was clear and cold. Jai-ho and Min-ki sat in their spacesuits inside the Star Sweeper, the special spacecraft built for their mission. The ship looked different from normal space shuttles because of Du-yeon's large magnetic collector attached to its front. "Final systems check," Min-ki said, his voice calm. He had done this many times before, but Jai-ho could feel her hands shaking as she checked her controls. In the control room below, Han-sol watched his screens while Du-yeon made final adjustments to the collector's power systems. Director Taiwan stood behind them, looking more worried than ever. 10 seconds to launch," the computer announced. Jai-ho closed her eyes for a moment, remembering all her training. The rocket engines roared to life. Jai-ho felt like a giant hand was pushing her back into her seat as the Star Sweeper lifted off. Through the window, she watched the ground fall away and the sky turn from blue to black. "First stage separation complete," Min-ki reported, everything looking normal. 8 minutes later, they were in space. Jai-ho looked down at Earth, beautiful and blue below them. But her wonder didn't last long. Her screens were already showing the debris field ahead. "There are more pieces than we thought," she said, checking Han-sol's AI predictions. "The magnetic collector will need to work at full power." Min-ki carefully guided the Star Sweeper toward the first target area. They could see pieces of old satellites and rockets floating past their windows. "Activating collector," Jai-ho announced. The large dish at the front of their ship began to hum. On their screens, they watched as small pieces of metal started moving toward them. "It's working." Du-yeon's excited voice came through their radio. "The magnetic field is pulling in the debris exactly as planned." For the next few hours, they moved carefully through space, collecting pieces of junk. Each piece was stored in special containers on the sides of their ship. But as they worked, Jai-ho noticed something strange on her screens. "The debris is moving differently from Han-sol's predictions," she said. "The patterns are changing faster than the AI expected." Min-ki looked at his own screens with concern. "The magnetic field might be affecting more pieces than we planned. We need to be careful or we could make things worse." They continued working, but the job was harder than anyone had expected. Some pieces of debris were too big for the collector. Others moved too fast. And every hour, more satellites reported damage from collisions. "We need to try something different," Jai-ho said after another difficult collection attempt. "What if we increase the power to the collector? We could grab more pieces at once. That's risky, Du Yun warned through the radio. The magnetic field might become too strong to control. But as they discussed options, a new alert appeared on their screens. A large piece of an old rocket was heading toward a working weather satellite. They had minutes to act. We have to try, Min-Ki decided. Ja-ho, power up the collector to maximum. I'll move us into position. The Star Sweeper turned toward the approaching debris, its collector glowing with energy. Ji-ho watched her screens carefully, hoping they weren't about to make things much worse. Everything they had worked for depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The Star Sweeper's magnetic collector hummed louder than ever as it worked at maximum power. Ji-ho watched anxiously as the large piece of rocket debris moved toward them. The collector's blue glow lit up the darkness of space around their ship. Distance to target, 500 meters, Ji-ho reported. Her hands moved quickly over the control panel, adjusting the magnetic field strength. Min-Ki kept the ship steady, but she could see the worry on his face. They had never tested the collector at such high power levels. Suddenly, warning lights started flashing across their control panels. The ship shuddered violently. Temperature rising in the collector systems, Ja-ho called out. The magnetic field is becoming unstable. In the control room back on Earth, Han Sol's computer screens filled with red warning signs. The magnetic field is too strong, he shouted into his microphone. It's pulling in debris too fast. You need to shut it down. We can't shut down now, Min-Ki responded. That rocket piece will hit the weather satellite in 2 minutes. Millions of people depend on that satellite for storm warnings. Du Yun rushed to the Han Sol station, looking at the data. The collector is drawing too much power from the ship's main systems. You're losing control of the magnetic field. Ji-ho felt the Star Sweeper shake again as more debris crashed into their collection containers. The pieces were coming in faster and faster. Red warning lights now covered every screen in front of her. Main power systems failing, Min-Ki announced. His voice was steady, but Ji-ho could hear the tension in it. Switching to backup power. The ship's lights dimmed for a moment, then came back on. But the collector continued to pull in more debris than they could handle. The collection containers were almost full. We have a bigger problem. Han Sol's voice came through their radio. The magnetic field is affecting the ship's navigation systems. You're starting to drift out of position. Ji-ho looked out the window and saw he was right. The stars were moving in the wrong direction. Without proper navigation, they could end up anywhere. 30 seconds until rocket debris impact with the weather satellite, the computer announced. Min-Ki made a quick decision. Ji-ho, redirect all remaining power to the collector. I'll try to hold our position manually. But that could burn out all our systems, Ji-ho protested. We might not have enough power to get home. We don't have a choice, Min-Ki said firmly. Do it now. Ji-ho took a deep breath and pressed the emergency power override button. The collector's hum turned into a high-pitched whine. The ship's lights went completely dark, leaving them lit only by the bright blue glow of the magnetic field. Through the window, they watched as the massive piece of rocket debris changed course, pulled toward their ship by the powerful magnetic field. But other pieces of debris were coming too, drawn in by the increased power. Impact in 10 seconds, the computer warned. The control room on Earth fell silent. Du Yun held her breath. Han Sol's hands hovered over his keyboard, ready to try anything to help. Director Tadwan stood frozen, watching the screens. Ji-ho looked at her own dark control panel, then at Min-Ki. In the blue glow of the collector, she could see him fighting with the manual controls, trying to keep their ship stable. Everything they had worked for came down to the next few seconds. Either they would save the weather satellite and prove their system worked, or they would create an even bigger disaster in Earth's orbit. In the darkness of the Star Sweeper's control room, Ji-ho watched the large piece of rocket debris approaching their ship. The magnetic collector's blue glow was the only light they had. All other systems were shut down to provide maximum power to the collector. 5 seconds to impact, the computer announced. Suddenly, Hansel's voice came through their emergency radio. Wait, I have an idea. The rocket piece is made of special metal. If you change the magnetic field's frequency, you can use it like a giant magnet to collect smaller debris. Do Yun's voice followed quickly. He's right. The rocket piece is large enough to create its own magnetic field when properly charged. You could clear a much larger area. Min-Ki looked at Jiho. Even in the dim light, she could see the question in his eyes. This was her decision to make. Adjusting magnetic frequency, Jiho announced. Her fingers moved across the control panel, changing the collector settings. The blue glow changed to a deeper purple color. The large rocket debris slowed as it approached their ship. Instead of crashing into the collection containers, it stayed suspended in the magnetic field. Smaller pieces of debris began moving toward it, like metal filings to a magnet. It's working, Min-Ki said. The rocket piece is becoming a collection point. In the control room on Earth, Hansol quickly typed new commands into his AI system. The debris patterns are changing. The rocket piece is creating a chain reaction, but this time it's helping us clean up instead of making more mess. Do Yun studied the data coming from the Star Sweeper. The power drain is lower now. The rocket piece is doing most of the work. You should be able to restart some ship systems. Jiho carefully redirected some power back to the ship's main controls. The lights flickered on, and their navigation screens came back to life. We're still in position, Min-Ki confirmed. The weather satellite is safe. Over the next hour, they watched as their improvised system continued to work. The large rocket piece, suspended in their magnetic field, attracted smaller debris like a giant space vacuum cleaner. When one section was clear, they moved to another, dragging their newly created collection system with them. This is better than our original plan, Jiho said, checking their collection numbers. We're cleaning up areas 3 times faster than before. Hansol's AI program was learning from the new approach, updating its predictions. If we keep this up, we can clear the most dangerous debris fields in days instead of weeks, he reported. Even Director Tadawon was impressed. Other space agencies are calling, he told them through the radio. They want to know how we did it. This could change everything. As their shift ended, Min-Ki set the Star Sweeper on a stable course. They had cleared a large section of space around Earth's most important satellites. The improvised collection system was still working, guided by Hansol's updated AI program. We should get some rest, Min-Ki said to Jiho. Tomorrow we'll start on the next sector. Jiho nodded, but she kept watching the purple glow of their magnetic field. What had started as a desperate emergency measure had turned into something revolutionary. They hadn't just found a way to clean up space debris. They had discovered a whole new method of protecting Earth's orbital space. As she prepared for sleep in her small cabin, Jiho thought about how close they had come to disaster. Sometimes the best solutions came from the worst situations. Human creativity and teamwork had turned a crisis into an opportunity. 3 months after the Star Sweeper's first mission, Jiho stood at the window of the Korean Space Command Center, looking up at the clear night sky. The stars seemed brighter now that there was less debris blocking the view from Earth. The control room behind her was different too. New screens showed the positions of their cleanup ships, not just one Star Sweeper now, but a fleet of 5. Each ship carried an improved version of Du Yun's magnetic collector system. The latest report is ready, Hansol said, walking up to Jiho with a tablet. We've cleared 70% of the dangerous debris fields. The remaining 30% should be done within 2 months. Jiho nodded, remembering how close they had come to losing access to space completely. Now, thanks to their discovery, the situation was under control. Min-Ki entered the room, wearing his formal uniform. He had just returned from a meeting with space agencies from around the world. Everyone wants to help now, he said with a small smile. Funny how things change when you show them a solution that works. Director Tadawon, who had once dismissed Jiho's warnings, now proudly showed visitors their debris monitoring systems. He had become one of the strongest supporters of the new space protection program. Du Yun's presentation is about to start, Hansol reminded them. They walked to the main conference room, where screens showed space officials from 20 different countries. Du Yun stood at the front, explaining the new rules for satellites. Every new satellite must now have a magnetic response system, she said. If it stops working, we can use our collectors to bring it down safely. No more abandoned equipment in orbit. Jaiho looked at the faces on the screens. These were the same people who had ignored the space debris problem for years. Now they listened carefully and took notes. The near disaster had taught everyone an important lesson about taking care of space. After the meeting, the team gathered in their favorite coffee shop near the Space Center. They had started this tradition during the crisis and kept it even now that things were better. The Chinese Space Agency wants to build their own Star Sweeper ships, Minki told them. They've asked for our help training their crews. The Europeans too, Hansol added. My AI system is being installed in control centers around the world. It's getting better every day at predicting debris movements. Jaiho sipped her coffee, thinking about how much had changed. She remembered the night she first noticed the growing debris problem, how frustrated she had felt when no one would listen. Now, space agencies had special teams just for tracking and cleaning up orbital debris. We're getting a new project next month, Du Yun said excitedly. They want us to design a system for protecting the moon's orbit. They're worried about debris from the new lunar stations. One step at a time, Jaiho said with a smile. First, let's make sure Earth's orbit stays clean. As they walked back to the Space Center, the setting sun turned the sky orange and pink. Soon the stars would come out again. Somewhere up there, the Star Sweeper ships were working, keeping space safe for the satellites that connected their world. Thanks to human ingenuity and cooperation, space would remain open for future generations to explore. Jaiho looked at her team, now her close friends, and felt proud. They had not only solved a crisis, but had changed how humans thought about space. It wasn't just a place to put things anymore. It was an environment that needed protection, just like the Earth below.